Please.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Paul Stoddard. I'm running to be state representative in the 70th District. I've just recently retired from Northern, so I will be devoting my time full-time to my only job, which will be state representative. I'm running because, frankly, I'm very tired of the way we do politics in this state. I'm tired of the way we do it across the country, as a matter of fact, but we'll take one thing at a time. I've got several ideas about how to improve our political system. Some of these I've already actually managed to get passed on the DeKalb County Board, and Tim might be able to back me up if he's so inclined. But I think the board works a lot more nonpartisanly now than it used to. We don't argue about R's and D's at the back of the name. We listen to each other. We hear each other. We work together to solve the county's problems. Part of that was due to what I call committee sharing, where instead of the majority party controlling every committee, the majority party and minority party split them proportionally to their representation. This gives the minority party a stake in successful governance. They're no longer purely an opposition party trying to stop the other side from doing anything. And it gives them a chance to advance their own agenda, bring issues important to them up to the full board for a vote in front of the full public. And as I said, I think this has worked very well. This plan has survived Democratic majorities and Republican majorities. So I think clearly this is something people like. I'd like to see us move to local funding of campaigns to remove outside interests, whether they're big money, corporate, political, from local elections. I don't think Mike Madigan or Bruce Rauner have any business dumping tons of money into our race to try to influence who we elect and send down to Springfield. I'd like to see us move towards splitting the leadership of the parties and the government. If you are the head of the party, I don't think you should also be Speaker of the House. I think that's too much power in one place. I would move and support term limits on leadership. I think 30 years as a leader in Springfield is way too much. I am not in favor of term limits. I don't think we in Northern Illinois have any business telling who the people in other districts can and cannot elect to represent them. But I do think we can solve some of the problems by moving towards term limits for the leadership. And there was probably a fifth one, but I lost track. Other than that, I'm also for reinvesting in Illinois. Studies have shown that there are two investments you can make in a state that guarantee a positive return. Those are in education and infrastructure. If we have an educated populace, that means we have an educated workforce, which will attract more companies and better jobs to Illinois. If we have an educated populace, we also have an educated consumer base for companies who want to do business here. And educated consumers tend to have more money to spend and make a better consumer base. And finally, we need to rework our tax structure. We rely, as has been said earlier, way too much on property taxes to fund K through 12 education. We have an excellent allocation scheme. We don't have an excellent funding scheme. When we rely on local property taxes, we have an inherently unfair educational system, and we are going to deprive large populations of the chance to get a good education and to break the poverty cycle. And we put too much pressure on homeowners. I have spoken to way too many retirees and senior citizens who say they're afraid that they are not going to be able to stay in their homes that they worked for 30 years to buy because property taxes keep rising. I think if we move to a graduated tax, do an income tax, do a tax swap, reduce property taxes, move some of that burden over into income taxes in a graduated sense, we can solve several problems. The senior citizen problem, not the least of which, because most retirement income is not taxed in Illinois, so they'll be getting a break on their property tax and not being asked to pay more than the income tax. So that should be able to keep people in their homes. Mark has asked, and it's a very good question, where do those brackets fall? Now, I've played around with some numbers, and the numbers are probably wrong because I'm limited to what I can find on the state's website, which is not set up to be transparent. But the goal would be, if you're making $50,000 or below, your taxes would go down. Between $50,000 and $150,000, your taxes would stay where they are. Above $150,000, we'd ask you to pay more. So those are my brackets, as best as I can come up. You're welcome. So those are the main reasons I'm running, and I'll be thrilled to take any and all questions you guys might have.
Would you support, at least at the time when it happened, the independent map amendment, the idea of taking redistricting away from partisanship and putting it in an independent committee?
Thank you. That was the fifth point I had in that first bit.
You already said term limits. I'm like, damn, I got to get him on this now.
So yes, I'm for ending gerrymandering. I think we need to put together an independent commission. In DeKalb, when I was chair of the ad hoc rules committee, we actually addressed this issue and made a fair map rule that basically here, the rule was that we're going to have a computer draw the maps. I'm not so sure I'm comfortable with that, but at least it's definitely nonpartisan. I'd be in favor of some sort of bipartisan or nonpartisan commission that would set up the parameters. We want to keep municipalities together. We want contiguous units, obviously, and so on. And then maybe let a computer use a couple of different algorithms, draw up some maps, but still have human beings decide which is the final map. I'm not quite ready to turn this over to Skynet just yet. Yeah, Mark.
I'm thrilled that you mentioned about 30 years as a leader of a party and the Speaker of the House is too long. First thing you're going to have to do, if elected, is to vote on the Speaker of the House. And let's say Madigan is the Democratic candidate. Will you vote for Madigan, or will you vote or abstain, or vote for someone else?
Okay, so you've asked me this before. And
I want it on the record.
Yeah, and the first time I just blatantly said no.
Yeah, you said no.
And then somebody came up to me right after that, at the end of that meeting, and said, you might want to rethink that. Because to do a lot of these things, so all the first set of 5 things that I said I wanted to do, that's going to fall under the purview of the Elections Committee for the legislature. So it would be a good idea for me to be on the Elections Committee if possible. Who controls the committee assignments?
Your buddy, Madigan.
Not my buddy, but the Speaker of the House. And so in order to get some of these things done, each one of which would severely limit his power, by the way, I don't know that pissing him off as the first course of action that I take is the best way to get any of that done. So, I mean, I'm not a fan of his leadership, but I have to think about what's the best way to go about changing things so that we can get some fresh blood in there.
It just goes against what you just said. You said 30 years is too long.
It is too long.
32 years.
Well, if the last 2 years are enacting things that make 33 and 34 impossible, that's a compromise I can live with.
We have a question from the audience. What are your specific plans to improve our educational system here in Illinois?
Okay, so I've taught, well, it's really kind of a two-tiered question. When you talk about education, because I taught at Northern for 29 years, my first thought goes to higher education, which is the university, and obviously that's a key part of our district. And then, of course, there's also K through 12. And having taught at Northern for 29 years, I know that we can improve our K through 12 educational system as well, because I see the outcome of that. We have some very excellent students, but we have a lot of students who are just not prepared for the rigors of college academic career. But, so one of the first things, as I said, is change the way we fund education. K through 12 can't be relying purely on local property taxes. I think we need to do, again, property tax relief, make up the revenue elsewhere, and then have the state distribute it according to the current distribution algorithm, much more equitably around the state based on need and so forth. For higher education, I got to see up close and personal the effects of the budget stalemate of the last 2 and 3 years ago on Northern, I saw how we lost a lot of students who left. Many of them left due to the uncertainty and whether or not schools would be able to stay open. We lost a lot of faculty for much the same reason. If they didn't know that they were going to be able to finish the next 20 or 30 years of their career there, they were going to find greener pastures. And the students and faculty we lost are the ones who are most mobile, the ones who are at the top of their fields, at the top of their academic standing, the ones with the financial wherewithal to leave the state. And those are the very people we want to keep here, the brightest and the best. So we need to reinvest in higher education. We need to actually bring the funding levels for Northern. Right now, Northern, I believe, is getting 90% of what it got in 2015. So that was 3 years ago, before the budget crisis. We've been losing money for a long time. Not losing. We've been getting less and less money from the state. When I first got to Northern, I believe Illinois paid about 51% of our operating expenses. Illinois now pays about 20% of our operating expenses. And you ask why tuition goes up. Because the only places universities can make up that lack is with raising tuition. Nobody wants to raise tuition. That's another reason, of course, students are going to flee the state, is if they get better deals elsewhere. So I think we need to spend more to invest in our higher education system.
You know, Paul, you brought up a very good point, having been a teacher at Northern as well. Illinois is the #1 state in the union for kids leaving to go out of state. The state of Iowa is 30% of their students at the University of Iowa and Iowa State come from Illinois. How can we stop this trend? I know recently you changed the state changed the law that in-state tuition would be offered to out-of-state students, which Iowa has been doing for many, many years. How are we going to stop this loss, this migration of good quality students to other schools? And not saying that we don't have good schools.
Well, you know, the granting in-state tuition to out-of-state students, I don't see how that's going to keep any of our students from leaving.
No.
It might attract more students from out of state to come here. But we need to, and you know, we need to demonstrate that we're serious about higher education in Illinois, that we value it. And you can't just say, I value something. You have to show that you value it. So, again, I really think we need to look at the schools that need more help financially. We need to look at the schools that are having trouble. So I taught in the geology department. We lost our hydrogeologist who went to greener pastures about 4 years ago. And this year we're finally looking for a new hydrogeologist. Hydrogeology is the field that the vast majority of our graduates get jobs in. So we lost, perhaps in terms of training people for the workplace, we lost our most valuable faculty member, and it's taken us 4 years to replace him. By contrast, I was at a faculty senate meeting, and the provost, who is now president, and the then chief financial officer were there, and they were getting asked questions, and somebody asked them a question about contracts or whatever. And the chief financial officer said, you know, I know we're getting behind in contracts, and you know, I've got to look over all these things, and I just can't do it on my own. We needed to hire somebody. So we went out and hired somebody, and now that process should go a lot more smoothly. So they saw a need, and boom, it was in their office, so they filled it. We've had a need, a vital need for the last 4 years, and we haven't been able to fill it. Administrative bloat, I think, is a real issue at the universities, and that is something I think we really need to address. I would like to really see a breakdown, university by university, over the last 10, 15, 20 years. How much of your budget goes to academics? How much of it goes to administration? And let's see what a reasonable level is and fix it there. You will not be able to spend more than 35% on administration or whatever that number ends up being. You can spend it however you want, but that's it. because the mission of the university obviously is not to administer people, it's to educate people.
I'll keep it short. You talk about things that you want to spend, and then you talk about with education and talk about taxes. Could you see yourself voting for an unbalanced budget? And if so, what would those conditions be?
Okay, so on the DeKalb County Board, I've been head of the Finance Committee for the last 4 years or so. And for 3 of those years, we've actually voted a balanced budget. You know, and a lot of people like to make the analogy with families. Families have to live with a balanced budget until they borrow money for a house or borrow money for a car or borrow money for education. So your budget is balanced in the sense that you are making payments on those loans, but you have spent more when you bought the house or the car or sent the tuition check in. Then that year you probably spent a lot more than you made. So those things, I think most of us agree, are rather important. Those are investments. If there are investments that we are sure, or as sure as we can be, are going to have a positive return for the future, I can see doing that. Now, I don't know that the state actually is allowed by law to have an unbalanced budget, but we get around that by borrowing money. If it's a good investment, that's the only way you can justify borrowing money. Mark.
One last question, Mark.
Pritzker has floated the idea, I'm going to use the proper terminology, of a tracking device / get miles, a gasoline. He floated the idea. I didn't say he proposed the idea, but in an interview...
He talked about the idea.
Right. Yeah. He talked about the idea. So if this were to come to fruition and a vote's on the floor of the House, would you be in favor of such an idea?
All right, so that idea is actually based on electric cars.
Right.
So the idea is we pay for our road maintenance primarily with a gasoline tax. If you drive, you're taxing the roads, you're using the roads, I mean, you're putting wear and tear on the roads, and you're getting benefit from the roads, so shouldn't you pay for the roads? And the best way to do that has always been, well, if you drive, you have to use gas, so we're going to tax the gas to pay for the roads. But with electric cars, that equation has changed. And so, in the interest of fairness to those of us still driving gas cars, because a Chevy Volt costs like $40,000, where people are searching for alternative ways to raise money to pay for road maintenance. And so, I would have to see what that looks like. Are we going to reduce gasoline taxes and replace them with a per mile tax? What does that involve in terms of privacy issues? How many of us have the toll transponders? That, you know, you're giving up your privacy when you do that too. So there are concerns. I'm not going to promise you yes or no on this because I know I'll get in trouble with you if I do. But I mean, there's a rationale for it. I'd have to see more details about it. What it's going to replace? Are there going to be checks on privacy issues, et cetera?
You said replace. Right now, there was talk of just adding this to the gasoline tax because Illinois loves to tax. So there wasn't much talk about getting rid of the tax, just adding.
Well, replace, reduce, add. That's what I said. I've got to see it. I've got to see it.
There's a lot of it going on. There's a lot of television genre wording that we don't really understand. And I don't want to drag this out much longer because everybody's been here for a couple hours. But we do have problems with the state, and whoever becomes our state representative, it's got a big challenge ahead of them, as David does in the 45th district. I mean, we had some major challenges. We're the #1 state in the union for people leaving. The #1 state for kids going out of state. So we've got our own share of problems we've got to address, and it's not just one. I hope, Paul and you and Jeff Becker, this is not a one-dimensional.
No.
We're multidimensional. We've got a lot of problems to solve and a lot of problems to fix.
I want to correct one thing or clarify one thing. We are the #1 state in net people leaving. We have an awful lot of people who are coming into Illinois. We just happen to have more who are leaving. So there are a lot of people who see an advantage to coming to Illinois. We need to be stressing that. We need to be finding out what is it. I mean, I think we should all have some pretty good ideas. What is it that attracts you to Illinois? We have the largest economic engine in the region here in the city of Chicago. People would be foolish not to consider trying to do business using that economic engine. So we need to figure out how to take better advantage of what we do have to offer. We need to figure out how to reverse some of the negative effects that have been driving people out. I mean, there's no doubt that people are leaving. But I love the reverb on this thing.
In case he wants to be a rock star, if he doesn't get this, he can always be a rock star.
I am a geologist. And that I'll sit down.
Are you taking me on the road as your backup guy? Well,